Well, let's get started here. I'll admit people as they come in, but um, it looks like we have maybe some people who were here last time, and we have some new participants. We're very excited to have you here for the second installment of the Big Texas Read with David Samuel Levinson. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas, and together with Alexandra, the Executive Director of Gemini Inc. in San Antonio, we've come together for this virtual book club. I want to turn it over to Alexandra just to say a little bit about Gemini Inc. I love that it's Dallas and San Antonio. If you're not familiar with Gemini Inc., Alexandra will tell you all about it right now.
Thanks, Blake. Just quickly, because we want to get on to the wonderful stuff of David's novel. But Gemini Inc. we are a writing arts center in the heart of San Antonio. We've actually been around for 27 years, and we love things like this. We have free writing workshops, low-cost writing workshops. We just want to get people writing creatively, and then we want to introduce people to great writers and great stories. So when we were approached by David and Blake about beginning this kind of like statewide virtual book club, I just loved the idea. So I'm just psyched to be a moderator along with Blake tonight. We're really psyched to have you here. And just to hang out for the second, 100 pages of Tell Me How This Ends Well, and just have some great time with David the novelist. So I'm going to be just sharing and asking questions with Blake, and then starting at 8 o'clock, we're going to do more of a formal Q&A, but we'll be using questions that people pre-submitted. Is that correct, Blake, before today's session?
Yes, we've got some great questions. So thank you for submitting those in advance. And if you have any questions about the craft or business of writing, we're going to save those to the very end so that we can just focus the bulk of our time on listening to David talk about this great section with Edith and about his book. And by now you probably all know David. You're well into, you've read half of his book, if not all of it so far. We're lucky to have David teaching fiction at Writing Workshops Dallas and Gemini Inc. He teaches fiction there as well. David, you're working on your third novel, right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're reading.
I'm in the middle of it.
And I'm going to hand it over to you, David. You're going to read the section that was suggested, I guess, on page 116. So I'll hand it over to you now.
All right. Thank you very much. Very happy to see everyone again. And I will just read from page 116. Edith renting the car. When the shuttle finally drove off, carrying the hateful old codger with it, Edith watched it, quaking with anger, hurt, humiliation, and a tiny wilting joy for having stuck up for herself, even if it were only the most minor and fleeting of victories, and left her hollowed out and chagrined. Hadn't she taught her students better? Hadn't she carped about detachment and disengagement, about when to turn one's back on the evils that men did and when to acknowledge them? The high road must be a reward in and of itself, she told them year in and year out, until it lost all meaning and even she began to tire of hearing herself say it. Act with Kantian goodwill and you can never go wrong, except that Kant was a rabid anti-Semite, as some of her Jewish students pointed out, so why should they trust him? Which of course led them down the rabbit hole into the murky, claustrophobic catacombs of man versus his ethics, man versus his philosophy. Edith left her suitcase by the door and hesitantly approached the counter, where a buxom young woman with frizzy red hair and a glinting gold Star of David dangling from her neck said, "Hi, I'm Edith. How can I help you today?" Edith Plunkett, reporting for duty, she replied, marveling that the girl seemed like a clone of her younger self, while she tapped on her keyboard, keeping her eyes locked on the screen, clearly uncomfortable with Edith staring. "I can't seem to locate you in our system," the girl said. "Are you sure you have a reservation with us today?" "Positive," Edith said, though she wasn't positive at all. "It went through Jocelyn, our department admin." "Do you have a confirmation email handy by any chance?" the girl asked, just as sweet as Edith had not been at that age. Edith rummaged through her purse and retrieved her iPhone, which was still set to airplane mode. The moment she flipped the little digital button to off, the phone began to vibrate and light up like a disco as one text message, email, and voicemail after another was magically downloaded from the ether. She had to admit that Jacob had been right when he suggested she switch to the super fast, super sleek iPhone, which she looked upon with reverence as she did all things electronic and technical and well beyond her ken. Every time she used her phone, it was like Hanukkah all over again. After a second or two of scrounging and scrolling through her Emory email account, she finally came upon the errant message which Jocelyn had forwarded to her and was dated last month. Oh, I see what happened. It looks like you did have a reservation with us, but it was for yesterday, which is why I couldn't find you. The system wipes itself clean every 24 hours, explained the girl to a horrified, perturbed Edith. And of course, our entire fleet is out, she added, or else I could fix this problem for you immediately and get you into a car. I know this has nothing to do with you, Edith said, trying her best to stay composed, although with every passing second she was growing more and more unsure of herself, the ice-cold hands of panic and doubt pressing down upon her chest. But I don't think Jocelyn made an accidental mistake with the dates, because Jocelyn never makes accidental mistakes with anything. I think she made a purposeful mistake, and I say this only because she and I have never gotten along, not after the incident with the boxes. And though Edith knew she was rambling, she couldn't help herself, not even when the people in line behind her began to grow irritable. I'm on my way to the valley to visit my parents. My mother's dying, she said, knowing how it sounded, but saying it anyway. So is there anything at all you can do for me, please? I'm sorry to hear about your mother, the girl said. If you'd like to wait, I think I'll have a return in about half an hour. And she gestured to the next person in line who, impatient and with nostrils flared, stepped up beside Edith. I'm going to have to ask you to have a seat now, ma'am, she added, suddenly shuddered, cold, and efficient with the power of her office. End.
Thank you, David. That kind of goes great with that suggestion from Carol to read goes great with our first question, which Alexandra is going to kick us off with. So I'll hand it over to Alexandra.
It's all about this beginning scene, the minute after Edith lands in LA. So here's my question, David. Mm-hmm. Edith asks herself, this is on page 115, after being on the airport shuttle and experiencing anti-Semitism from one of the older passengers, who's wearing a bow tie and very nicely dressed, by the way, she asked this great question. She's kind of talking to herself, of course. She goes, where did the hate come from? And I think this is a question pivotal to the book. At least this has been my feeling based on my reading experience so far. And that's each character, Jacob and Edith in the first two sections, and Mo in the section that's coming up, have experienced hate from others towards themselves and their own hate towards their father in very particular ways. So each is grappling with the role of hate in their lives and even in themselves. Can you comment on that? And how you kind of used characters to explore like all these different angles on hate? At least that's one reading I come away with.
I kind of feel like you asked and answered the question.
It was a little long, sorry.
No, it's fine. I love that question, actually. It gets to the heart of this book, quite frankly. And it's something I've always wondered about, why we dislike somebody and why, how that happens, why it happens. So I was curious to write about it, and I came upon these three lovely siblings, and I gave the question to Edith because clearly she's an ethicist, so it makes the most sense that she would ask it. But it's, I have to just pause for 1 second and discuss just for a second about the autobiographical nature of this book. And just to let every one of you know, every book you will ever read, and I know I don't really have to say this, but every book you read by a writer is in some way autobiographical. But let me just reassure you that I never wanted to kill my parents. And my father is not Julian Jacobson. And my mother was not Roz. There are characteristics of this book that are inevitably autobiographical just because of the nature of this book and what I wanted to write. But other than that, so when I'm talking about giving, I'm giving the question of, why do people hate to Edith? I mean, it is something that I was interested in, but what ends up happening when you're writing a book, especially like this one, which took a lot out of me and was also terrifically fun, is the character kind of like invents the question and makes it their own. So Edith made the question her own. I mean, when I say I gave it to her, she's the only character in the book who is, and I wouldn't say smart enough, but she's the most analytical in the book. So of course she's going to get the question, right? Jacob probably asks, I think they all ask the question in one way or another. It's never the same, but they all eventually have to ask the question, why am I hated and who am I hated by? And they all come to the conclusion that it was their father, who they are all, I don't know how to describe it. They're all sort of they're mirror images of him, but they're also their own reflections. And I think I did a pretty good job, at least I hope I did, of balancing like Roz's softer nature with Julian's harder nature. And so you get these like sort of warped children. And so, yeah, they're always pushing toward figuring out the boundaries of hate and how far they can go. And of course, murder is like sort of the last hurrah of hate, right? And, you know, you always have to think like, or I was always thinking, you know, these are Jewish kids who are, you know, plotting in a very sort of darkly humoristic way. I never really thought, and I still don't think, and I really don't know whether these kids really carry this murder out or not. That wasn't really the point of the book. The point of the book was not whether or not they murder their father. The point of the book was whether or not they save their mother. That's the whole point of this book. The whole point of this book is, can they vanquish the hatred within themselves to stop something from happening? Just as in Nazi Germany, were there enough people in the world, in that particular world, to stop what was happening? And the answer was no. So, yeah, the whole idea of hatred runs rampant through this book. Yeah, good question, Alexandra.
No, and I think even there's that scene with Deet and Jacob when Jacob visits Deet's parents. And Jacob has to ask, I mean, Deet kind of confronts him and says, why do you hate yourself so much? Why do you look for hate everywhere? So the other question is also self-hatred, right? So I think, yeah, I just like how all the characters are like a different facet on this one question. And I loved how Edith just comes out and asks the question. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, she
really
has,
kind of struck me.
Yeah, I mean, Jacob's very sensitive, but Edith is definitely the thinker. And Mo is the Mo is the actor, the doer, you know. I had these all, you know, this was like very, 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 very methodically set up, you know. Jacob is like the airy, dreamy playwright. Edith is like science, and Mo is like the carpenter. He's, you know, he's building things, he's doing things. So it makes sense that when you first meet him, he's running.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just thought, what a better way to show his character than he's running away from things, you know, or running to something. Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, my next question is it sort of bounces off of that a little bit, but from a different angle. I noticed you have just great details of place in this book. You know, and, you know, since I'm a writer, I can kind of read like a writer. And of course, I really love some of them, like the dreidel-shaped pool in Mo's backyard. Okay. And I think you're the only writer I've ever known who have used putty as a color word. And you actually made a rental car building sound interesting. You know, you say the squat putty colored rental car building. So, you know, and then of course Mo's house is very much a backdrop, especially in the first section, and it continues to be. So how did you use details of place to kind of build up the drama in the book, or even to develop character? Was it something you were doing consciously, or just how did it feed into the story for you as the writer?
I mean, Mo's house had to be the center of everything. It had to be like, it had to stand for shelter. It had to stand for privilege. It had to stand for wealth. It had to stand for the emotional core of the entire book is Mo's house. It's where all, I mean, it's a house. So of course, like it comes with its own baggage. And I tried to sort of jazz it up a bit and make it a few years in the future. So like they have that bizarre sort of, that bizarre wall that looks out onto the backyard, that is clearly like a symbol of like the entire family, opaque 1 second, not, like looking out, looking in. Windows are very postmodern. I learned that in college. If you see a window in a story, it's like it represents postmodernism. And so I kind of took that to like, I wanted to take that to an even further extreme. Kind of reminded me of, I don't know, like Blade. In my mind, it reminded me of Blade Runner when like the guy Tyrell closes the windows and like he just presses a button and they kind of go opaque. I wanted something like that. I'm sure that it didn't come across that way, but and LA as sort of like a hellscape, a futuristic hellscape, which it really is in my book at least, but also set off against like Edelweiss Estates, which is, there's an actual place in Texas in College Station called Edelweiss Estates that I had to use. I was like, this is too good.
Yeah,
like
no,
every
that name
street
definitely stood out to me. Yeah.
every street, I mean, I made up a lot of those streets, but there were definitely streets that were named after like Bavarian villages. I mean, it was so weird. College Station, Texas, and there's like this subdivision, named, I mean, it was crazy. So I just kind of lifted that and brought it to LA.
And doesn't Mo live on Van Trop Lane or something like that?
Van Trop, yeah. The Van Trops from Sound of Music.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean there are a lot of references to, that kind of thing. I don't know if anyone's read ahead, but there's also like the Brady Bunch house, which is all, which offsets like what's happening in his house. The Brady Bunch house is like this fake. I mean, I love the Brady Bunch, but it ruined me pretty much for life because like no one acts that way. I mean, it's a sitcom, I realize that, but so Mo, of course, has this fondness for this house that doesn't exist and he's not even living in his house. Sorry, I'm giving this away. We're talking about Edith. Edith Edith walks into this house having already been abused, and she is summarily abused once again, immediately, almost by her dad, who sees right through her. And I loved that I somehow managed to make her like Invisible Girl. But also empowering her. Like Edith, I feel like is one of the most empowered characters in the book. And she changes, for me, she's the one who changes the most. She goes from having all of these issues with men, basically, because of her dad and because of her mom, but mainly her dad. And she evolves through 120 pages. She goes from someone who, she becomes the actor, rather than the acted upon. And it's it's so great to write a character who, her arc was so easy for me, where the other arcs were like, what the fuck am I doing? But yeah, anyway, I don't know if that answered it or not, but
yeah, no, just great details within the flow of the drama of this family. And I think, we have so many great questions, so why don't we just turn it over to some of the other questions we received. So Blake, you want to give us the next one that we got pre our Zoom chat today?
Yes. So Kathleen Kent, she wrote in and she said, Saul Bellow, channeling his inner Kierkegaard, thought Jewish humor combined laughter and trembling. Freud believed Jewish humor was a defense mechanism, a form of sublimated aggression that lets victims of persecution safely cope with their condition. Or, as Mel Brooks puts it, if they're laughing, how can they bludgeon you to death? So can you speak about
That's
how
funny.
dark humor informs and shapes your writing process?
Great question.
My, that is a great question.
I love the I love the Mel Brooks quote.
Yeah, no, that's a great quote. How does it inform? I mean, it's interesting it's an interesting question, actually, because I have a friend in New York who read this novel and loved it, but she was like, I don't see how it's darkly comic. I don't see the satire or humor in it at all. And this woman is Jewish, and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? What the fuck are you talking about? There's humor in this book, like on every page. Just because you don't get it doesn't mean that it's not funny. There are tons. I mean, I did my best to sort of leaven the darker themes of the rise of anti-Semitism and this murder plot, which is also, I mean, it's like, I mean, they're bumbling. These kids are bumbling. They don't know what they're doing. You know, it's mostly just a fantasy to them. At least in my head, that was the way I was writing it. I mean, clearly I'm not going to tell you guys how to read my book. You read it any way you want. But the idea that that this woman didn't find anything about the novel funny is very interesting to me, because I've had other people who are like, it's a total scream. It's been compared to, you know, older Jewish writers who, I can't remember their names because it was very strange for me to be compared to them because I never even heard of them, but apparently they were. Bruce J. Friedman was a big one. He wrote, I think in the 50s and 60s. I mean, it was so strange to have this novel that I wrote that's set in the future compared to novels set in like the 50s and 60s. It was very weird. So I'm not really sure anyone has ever really gotten this book the way I intended it to be read or, you know, reviewed. But I'm not sure we ever get to be read the way we intended it, you know. But as far as the humor, it's hard for me as a reader to, I mean, I laugh out loud at certain passages in certain books. I can't remember any of them right now, of course. But writing humor on the page is really hard. It can come off really slapsticky and not very well done. And I tried my best to sort of keep it from like moving into farcical. It's very easy. I mean, once you sort of commit to writing a book that you consider satirical, then it opens up all of these avenues for you. But if you're writing like a serious book and want to drop in hints of humor, that's one thing. That's something else, I mean. So I tried very much to sort of rein in as much as I could. I mean, you know, thus like the putty colored, you know, rental car agency. Like I tried to use language that sort of just combobulated the reader in a way. Like you're never really confronted, I guess, with a putty colored anything. I'm not sure where I got that. But I think there was a putty colored agency that I went to when I was in LA once. Like, I think I was like, ugh, this place is like, it's the color of putty. And putty, it's a funny word. So there's lots of like wordplay in this book. Or I tried to make it as much about the language that was being written as the dialogue that was coming out of their mouths. Like a lot of thought went into this. A lot.
Well, Carol just said, you know, it was just simply funny that Edith was an expert on ethics, you know. So.
Right. Thank you. I forgot about that.
You know,
that makes sense. Yes. I totally forgot. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the ironies of these characters, you know, especially Edith, who does all of these things, who has, you know, stalked her ex, who had an affair with a married guy, who, what else did she do that was so terrible? A sexual misconduct suit that is not really her fault, but, you know, she gets involved in that. What else does she do that's so wrong? I can't remember. Anyone? Alexandra, do you remember anything
Well,
else
actually,
she
this
did?
chimes into Jennifer's question. Do you want me to jump into that? Because it kind of fits so
Yeah,
perfectly.
that's fine.
So Jennifer submitted a great question before today's author chat, and I'll read it now. Edith is such a contradiction. A tenured ethics professor, her whole professional career is teaching right from wrong.
Oh,
Yet she
right.
does all these things that are so wrong. She accuses coworkers of crimes without evidence. She has an affair, stalks a married man. She lies. She is under review for sexual misconduct with a student. She's part of a murder plot. What was your process for developing her character? What other situations were you considering having Edith a part of that got edited out of the book? I love that idea. So what ended up on the editing floor, David? But
Nothing
yes,
ended
great
up.
question,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
No, that's a great question. Nothing ended up on the editing floor. Edith came out exactly as you have read her. I just wanted I wanted to write this character. There had to be 3 different points of view about this whole murder plot thing. And she had to be the one who was hardest to persuade, because she was so attached to her father. And of course, the only thing she could be, I mean, she could be other things clearly, but I made her an ethicist just because being an ethicist and a woman, I tried to imagine what it would be like to be teaching at Emory as a female, in a Jewish female, especially in like in that kind of climate, and what that would mean. And she has these. She's not without self-knowledge or self-criticism. So she climbs into a van and immediately thinks she's part of the problem of global warming, and she really struggles with she struggles throughout the entire book. I mean, the best kind of characters are the ones who struggle, who fall down and pick themselves back up and learn something from it. And I think Edith especially is that kind of character. By the end of her section, she's been talked into this murder plot, but she still isn't sure she wants any part of it. So in some ways, she's exactly where she started, but in another way, she's like evolved like by leaps and bounds compared to her brothers. By men. I mean, I always think, no offense to the men in the room, but I definitely think women are the better sex, and definitely more elastic. At least a lot of the women I know have their sensitivities are more elastic, their hearts are more elastic. I've met some really stone cold women, that's true, but Edith is not one of them. I made her sort of as putty, she's like this by the end, I think she's like this she's fully colored in. When you start with her, she's a little puttied, like the rental car agency. She sees her reflection, this younger version of herself, and she recognizes it. But, even that little moment was so painful to her. Why is this person treating me? Why is my own reflection not speaking to me? So by the end, she finds her mojo, when she drives the van through that crowd. That was so great to write. Writing Edith was like the greatest. She was so much fun to write.
She's so complicated. Those are the funnest characters to read. Like as a reader, I'm just like kind of relishing. She's just so multifaceted, and I can imagine what that must have been like to write her, and just to have so much fun, because I can feel the fun and the movement in the sentences in this section for sure,
Yeah.
So,
good.
Just to follow up on the humor question, Robin had a question beforehand. She just said it seemed there was some dark humor and read like David Sedaris in some places, and she wondered, is David Sedaris a favorite writer of yours or a favorite read for you? Do you read David Sedaris?
No, I've never read him.
You've never have you ever heard him on This American Life, or you've never heard David Sedaris?
No, I've purposefully never ever listened to David Sedaris. I don't know why. He just never. I don't know why. I don't know why. I guess it's kind of weird, but I guess Me Talk Pretty One Day was that his like first major like success.
I'll send you the links
to Sedaris. Do you like Sedaris?
Yeah.
I tend to not trust like the popularity of someone. I know he's good. I've read essays of his. That's not true. I've read stuff in the New Yorker. He's great. He's funny. I have a friend, I don't even know if she's on here. Maybe she's not. But she went to see him when he came to Little Rock, and she hung out with him, and she was like, he's the greatest, and you remind me of him so much. And I was like, thanks.
Well,
I wish I had his success, but thanks.
Well, Melissa just in the chat just says she loves Sedaris' humor and compassion for family issues, and I love the complexity of the family issues, and even just like
Right.
whenever it was said, that that the mother or that she has everything that she needs. I think it was Jacob who said, but except for love, right?
Yeah.
And so like the idea of hate and love is so present in the book, but there's still these blind spots that the characters have that make for these really interesting revelations and moments as it relates to their character. So,
Agreed.
All right, and then we'll go to Lynn's question real fast. I'll double dip here and then turn it over to Alexander. But Lynn says, I'm wondering if David has thought about actors who would play as characters if a movie were to be made. I am very disappointed if I see a movie based on a book when I find out the actors because they don't fit my vision. I assume it's often out of the author's control and that the decision is made for box office sales. But we talked about this a little bit last time, but like, have you thought more about who you're envisioning or if this were made into a movie?
No, I had to give up that entire scenario of dreaming because one comes close. It was, yeah, I won't go into it, but yeah, no, I have no idea who would play anybody. I think someone was sort of slated for Edith.
Isla Fisher, yeah.
Isla Fisher. Yeah, no, I don't know. I would, I would love this book to get into the right hands, like to get into the actor doesn't even have to be Jewish, but to get into someone's hands who would know what to do with it. I mean, I guess that's every writer's dream. But now that I've fired my agent, yes, we all can congratulate me on that.
Yeah. So within the last 2 weeks, you did that?
No, I did this yesterday.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fresh off the press. Okay.
This is fresh off the press. Yeah. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I've fired 6 of them before him. So it's kind of old hat. But yeah, he was supposed to, sort of shop this thing around and my book, and he apparently is good friends with Todd Solondz, who did, what's that Jersey one? Welcome to the Dollhouse and whatever. They're all talk. They do nothing. So no, I've basically like shut down that fantasy. It's a shut down fantasy, people. No more. I can't do it.
I think we mentioned Emma Stone for Edith, or we actually have some good possibilities. Yeah.
We can keep doing it. You guys are welcome to cast this movie.
We can do fantasy film the way people do fantasy football, right? Like kind of
right. Yeah.
Like a cast.
I'll bring it to my movie agent, and she can laugh at me.
Ooh, Natasha Lyonne as Edith gets my vote from David. Okay.
Wait, was that me?
What's yeah?
That was me. I said that.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, okay,
I
right.
think. Yeah.
Um, so I think we'll just kind of move through. So we'll keep hope out there for a possible film version, David. We might still pick up this thread in the next session, next author chat. Um, there's a really nice question from Maggie. She goes, once again, all about the characters because your characters are so great. But she goes, I kept waiting for Julian, the father, to have some redeeming qualities, but in my view, he never did. I'm curious about the writer's process in developing this character. Certainly his murder seemed justifiable as a result, but I wonder whether the struggle, yeah, if you struggled with the issue. So I guess just talking about Julian a bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Is
a
he
great question.
redeemable characters, no redeemable characteristics,
I thought he had, it's interesting. I thought I'd given him some redeemable characteristics. Like, I mean, because no one is all black and white, but Julian was such a hard character to, I mean, if there's any, I'm not even going to say this. He was hard to get right. I mean, he does some nice things. I think he's nice to Roz in his own way. He gives Jacob money. I think he brings the barbecuer to Moses. So he does these things, but it's unfortunate. His expectations, I think, of his kids and of his own life and maybe his marriage, I think probably ruined him, as high expectations often do, and but no, I mean, in any kind of fiction, I think there doesn't necessarily have to be like a clear-cut villain, but I think it's much easier when there is a clear-cut villain. And I mean, I think what readers have the hardest time with this novel is like, who to root for. Who are they supposed to root for? Are they supposed to root for Julian to get out of the situation? Are they supposed to root for the kids to off him? And I think it's interesting because to me, it's very, very clear. I mean, it's very clear. I wrote it. I wrote it, so I know. I mean, I won't say any more about the moralistic elements of this book, but I think it's interesting when people can't figure out on their own or can't sort of get past the whole murder plot. Like, it immediately tarnishes the character of the characters that they would be involved in this thing, when that's not really the way the book is supposed to be read. It's actually supposed to be read not as a plot to kill their father, but a plot to save their mother. And that's always sort of been a contention of mine, even in like the book jacket copy, which was totally wrong. So when you think about it as it's a plot to save their mom rather than a plot to kill their dad, I mean, it might not shift that much for you, but that was the way I was writing this book. So for me, as like a reader / writer, like when I've been reading this book again, I've been reading it with the intention of these kids trying to, I mean, it's not like they're out for money. There's never, Edith says once, like, oh, I was wondering when you were going to make this about money. And they're like, it's not about money. It's very clear, and I've made this very clear throughout the writing of this book, in many ways, that it's all about the mom. That the father is almost incidental to the entire plot. He serves at the discretion of, I don't want to say the plot, but I mean, if I had to rewrite him, I probably would have made him a little bit nicer, but then the reader would have been more horrified to learn about the plot if he's like a super nice person. I don't know. I mean, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, quite frankly, when you're writing a murder plot where children and families are involved. But, you know, it's not a plot that's so outlandish. This happens every day. Children murdering their parents, husbands murdering their wives, wives murdering their husbands, dogs dying, peacocks dying, you know, it happens. Wasn't that one of the questions, actually?
Well, actually, there's some great comments on the redeeming factors of Julian. Carol said he loved his research job, um, and making his son kill the mice. And then I love Melissa's comment. She said he seemed like a red shirt character in Star Trek Doomed. So it looks like readers have different takes on Julian. Some seeing a few redeeming characters, despite obviously red shirt character like in Star Trek. Yeah, that reminds me of I don't know. Do you know the film Galaxy Quest?
I love Galaxy Quest. Yeah.
And there's that great character that Sam Rockwell, and he says it's a great meta moment about script writing. He goes, I don't have a last name. That means I'm gonna die. That means I'm gonna die.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess, you know, is Julian like that? You know, he doesn't have the last name and he's just scripted for this destiny or not. But it looks like you're having different reactions to him, definitely, David.
I think he's he's a sacrificial lamb, but he kind of deserves to be the sacrificial. He's trussed himself up as the sacrificial lamb by being such an asshole and so nasty to everyone around him, you know? Except, you know, go ahead.
Well, Melissa says Julian is a MacGuffin.
Oh. Could be. I tried to write him as, I mean, E.M. Forster has like the flat characters and the round characters. And I tried to write him as a round character, but Julian kept wanting this to be a flat character. I mean, he's more of a, I mean, he looms so largely in these kids' lives, but he's really a shadow, you know? He walks through the book as sort of like, to me, he was always sort of, he was dead before the book even started. Whether he lives or dies, he's already, just because of his nature in this book, he's sort of already lifeless, kind of lifeless, you know?
Well, you got two questions in the chat just to kind of follow up on this idea about it's not a book about a plot to kill the dad, rather it's a book about the desire to save the mom. And so kind of two things that you can address based in the chat. You can see Phil says Edith only joins the plot when she learns the truth about the figs. How is that about saving the mom? And what do you think about that?
I'm sorry, what?
Well,
can you ask it again?
Well, Phil says Edith only joins the plot when she learns the truth about the figs. How is that about saving the mom? And Robin says, I felt like the desire to save mom, who only had months to live, was really a desire of the boys, particularly to save their own esteem by standing up to the bully.
Oh.
That's a great point. I was thinking some of that too. Like, she's only got months to live. So how is this saving the mom? So yeah, these are interesting questions. Yeah.
Yes, that's totally true. And as you were asking it, I was like, that's actually very interesting. Because I was also thinking as I was writing this, that the mother, the thing about that she only has months to live is, you'll see, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. You'll just have to, I actually can't address that without giving away the plot. So, as far as the figs go, yes. It had to move that way. It had to move if we're talking about Edith sort of recognizing that her father tried to kill her, yes. Then yes, a lot of it becomes a revenge plot, for sure. But there's also within the revenge plot the whole notion of wanting to be better than who we are, and so maybe the excuse is wanting to save mom. I don't know if that's true or not. I didn't write it that way, but that might be That might be an excuse. I don't know. I mean, it's complicated for me too. I mean, I love all these characters. I'm very protective of them, but they're very, very flawed. But I guess the thing that's different, I remember thinking about this before the Zoom session. I wanted to sort of make this clear. The kids are children. They're the children of these monsters. Whether you think about these characters as monsters or not, these kids were, you know, a lot of people I think these kids are whiny, overprivileged brats, and I guess you could read them that way, but I didn't really intend to write them that way. I tried to write them as sympathetic as possible. These kids who have been abused and mistreated by people who should not have abused or mistreated them. And the thing that separates them from Julian especially is they have self-knowledge. Even Moses, you haven't gotten to him yet, but especially Jacob and Edith. And that's partly because of being raised by these two people who are also very flawed. But I don't know, I kind of love Julian. I mean, he is who he is. He makes no bones about who he is. He never apologizes. I mean, that's the one thing about him that I always found so interesting. And it was something I was talking to a friend recently about this very thing. It's like you crave one thing from someone who will never give it to you. And that causes a lot of conflict in life. And you kind of want your life not to be full of conflict. But in fiction, it's amazing. In fiction, all these kids want are an apology, you know, and they know they're never going to get an apology ever. So they create their own apologies. I mean, I think that's what we all do in a certain way. There are certain people in our lives who will never give us what we want, and we have to end up going, you know, moving around them, moving through them, finding other ways to get what we want. And I think that's what these kids do throughout this book. They move around. Julian is like the obstacle in the river, you know. He's the one thing in the river that won't let them pass, and they have to figure out ways around him. And they want to take their mother with them, whether she's going to live for 4 months or 4 years or 4 days. I don't think the time of her, like the length of her life on Earth doesn't really matter. They want to give her a sense of peace, and Julian never lets her be at peace. So that's the way I wrote it.
Yeah, I think Melissa would agree with you, because she's chimed in and she says, how does the length of a person's life make her life more or less valuable? So it's kind of
exactly.
Like
I totally,
David. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys are great about asking me these questions, because these questions are amazing. I haven't even thought about these questions. I haven't really thought about this book in that much depth in forever. I'm not sure I ever have. So it's fascinating. Yeah, like the length of someone's life, what does that mean? Wouldn't, you know, they would rather, I mean, who knows how long Julian might or might not live, you know, he could live another 20 years, but they'd rather have their mother and have her happy for the 4 months. I mean, it's a trade-off, you know. I think they made the right decision.
Right, no, because in a way, all of us have a question mark over our head. Not to be too like morbid here, but yeah, you never know when your life is going to end, right? So it's a good point. I'd like to jump in and just kind of roll back a second, because there's a great other question just about Edith that I think will chime into some of these things we're talking about in this section, because it mentions Julianne. It's from Sam I Am, and it goes, despite her intelligence, Edith seemed the most brainwashed by Julian, at least as a child. Is there something to be said about the power of manipulation to warp intelligent people's minds?
Oh, God.
What do you think, David? There's a lot rolled up into that question.
Wow. That's quite a question. Yes, you're totally right. She was definitely manipulated by him. and brainwashed. Yes, she thinks that Roz is an actual witch, which is creepy in and of itself. What was the second part of the question? What was it? What was the whole
So
question?
it's more, this is more like a life question, but is there something to be said about the power of manipulation to warp intelligent people's minds?
I mean, are we talking about Trump here now? Is that what is this what we're going, was this a political ploy question?
Or not, or Edith seems to be representing this somehow, right? Because she's obviously very intelligent. So she brings that up.
I mean, I guess, I mean, again, you know, I wove in a lot of backstory into these narratives. I mean, the backstory is crucial to understand. I mean, whatever, this is like very obvious, but the backstory is crucial to understanding the character in the present moment. So to understand Edith in the present moment, I had to figure out a way to sort of untangle her from the brainwashing that she got. I mean, I never thought about it as brainwashing, quite frankly. I thought about it more as manipulative love, sort of love that is twisted and perverted. There's clearly love between Edith and her father, but everything. I mean, I think at one point Jacob describes Julian as like something as like a black hole. I mean, he's more poetic than I am, and that's sort of how Julian operates. He thrives on like, I mean, he thrives on the misery of others, which makes him a schadenfreude, but he also thrives on, he gets a kick out of manipulating everyone around him. So the boys clearly are not as manipulated because they're boys, but I feel like women are socialized differently, unfortunately. I have a lot of female friends who are in these very bizarre abusive relationships, and I'm like, what the fuck? And they just can't even see it. And that's part of what this book is also about. It's about domestic violence. I mean, the logical conclusion of domestic violence is what these kids are carrying out. It's the logical conclusion. It's the extension of all the abuse they suffered. Yes, we can all say therapy this, therapy that. Let's like move on and part ways and be happy, and but this is fiction, and I was clearly trying to make a point somehow. I don't know if my point got made or not, but I was very interested in writing a book about a couple different things. One of them was domestic violence. One of them was anti-Semitism. And what was the other thing? I don't know. Setting into the future? I don't know. But I remember thinking very clearly that I wanted to write some kind of book about the abuse that one can suffer within a family. Sort of going off of Tolstoy's, I must have read Anna Karenina like 100 times. Whatever that his famous quote about families. Every family is happy in the same way. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And it even goes to the quote I used, Chekhov, which I love. He wrote this amazing short story called Difficult People. And I used a line from it in the quotes. Every family has its own joys and its own horrors, but however great they may be, it's hard for an outsider's eye to see them. They are a secret. I mean, that's every family under the planet, under the sun, especially the Jacobsons in this book. So, I mean, it's interesting to explore, I'm doing it, I guess, in this new book of mine too. Like, I'm very interested in how people manipulate the system, how people manipulate one another. They do it through all various guises and means. It's pretty much why I'm single, because I am really tired of partaking of the manipulation that goes into being with somebody else. God love all of you who are with other people, but good for you for putting up with like the constant manipulation. Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, well I don't want to do that either. I mean, so whatever. I really wanted to explore in this book like what it meant to be manipulated and how one breaks out of that cycle. And Edith, I think, is a perfect example of breaking out of it.
Well, this is Edith's section, and we've talked about Edith, and then Robin and Erwin. I think this is a great question in the comments, just to talk about from the boys' perspective. But Robin and Erwin said, I felt like the desire to save Mom, who only had months to live, was really a desire of the boys, particularly to save their own esteem by standing up to the bully. So you were talking about the difference between the boys and Edith.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was also her desire to stand up to the bully as well, but definitely the boys, who definitely suffered the brunt of their father's ire or disappointment or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, Jacob, by the end of his section, do we think that he has stood up? I mean, Jacob has always sort of stood up for himself. He leaves, he goes to live elsewhere. He forms his own attachments. But Moses, on the other hand, being the heterosexual sort of like, the good Jewish son, which Jacob is clearly not seen as. I think Moses also has a harder time sort of grappling with the idea. I mean, he's also very on the fence as far as this whole murder plot thing. And Jacob is always for it. Jacob never wavers. So yeah, the whole idea of sort of reclaiming their manhood and doing away with the father, or in that way, getting rid of the father. I mean, I'm sure there are better ways to go about reclaiming your manhood, but these kids clearly can't figure that out. And I love them for that. I love them for like, it was a lot. I mean, I have to tell you, like, this was definitely the funnest book that I haven't had such fun writing a book, quite frankly. All of it's hell. All of it is just hell, other than writing this book, quite frankly. It's true.
I like how you compared LA to Blade Runner. You know what I mean? So there's actually like a film history of LA being kind of a dystopia. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I love that novel by what's his name, Philip K. Dick, and the movie is just, I mean, it's exquisite.
Who are the replicants and who aren't, right? So we could go off on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wanted to actually ask, we had a few more questions that I wanted to ask just from that were submitted before today. This is a great one from Jean, pivoting in a slightly different direction, but talking about two interesting animal characters. Both the white peacock and Nieves, the white rescue dog, represent purity and both wind up dead. On the other hand, the siblings, whose motives are not exactly pure, are plotting to kill their father, who is anything but an innocent soul. Please discuss the connection.
Oh boy. I don't know if there really is a connection. I mean, I think you made a connection, but I don't think I had made one when I was writing it. I guess you just have to keep reading. I mean, I can't really talk about this until the very end, quite frankly. It kind of gives away too much of the plot, right?
So we can kind of just hold that there as something to keep in mind.
Yes, we'll hold that. Hold it, hold it.
Okay, then we've got the final submitted question comes from Laura, which you kind of already talked about this a little bit at the start, but I just want to see if talking through some of these questions that have come through so far, has made you think anything new. She says, I'm interested in learning about what inspired you to create your three main characters in the way that you did. Their motivations, their quirks, their drivers. She says, based on our first talk, I feel certain parts of this novel are autobiographical with the volume turned way up, but I'd love to know more about your character development process.
That's a nice question.
That is kind of a big one. I'm going to keep it very brief. Well, as I said, I wanted to write about certain themes, and I chose these characters very, very specifically. I also wanted to write about some of the perceived strife that I had growing up. You know, my parents did a great job raising me and my brother. But, you know, there was always some patchy places, rough. Adolescence was fairly unkind to me, and I was very unkind to it. And so, yes, Jacob, who is a playwright, is probably the closest to me as far as a character goes. But like I said, my family has never had a Passover in Calabasas, California, at my brother's house, or at least I've never been invited. You take elements of your life and you sort of mix them all up into these palettes, and these palettes you then give them names, and then you put them into these situations, and you really hope for the best. And for me, this book just came together in one fell swoop. Like, it was just like all inside of me all at once. And maybe it's because I'm so close to the material that it was so easy for me to write. But I find a lot of times when I'm close to the material, it's impossible for me to write. So this was just sort of my perfect storm. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate that it didn't do better as far as selling, which I refuse to be embittered about, but I'm very bitter about it. And yeah, I mean, you'll be able to, if, as my father likes to point out, it's too autobiographical. And I don't think that it really is. I think that there are elements of autobiography, like I said, in everything that we write. You can find me in anything that I write, but Henry James wrote about his cousin, Mimi. Mimi was like his muse. I had a friend, Lisa, years ago, and all of my short stories are about her. But you would never know that if you didn't know that I just told you that. So it's sort of, it's a conundrum for any writer, I think. And I think my publishers were right. I was very angry at them when they were like, do not talk about any of the autobiographical elements in this book. And I was like, why? And they're like, just don't. You'll thank us later for it. And I was not thankful for a very long time, but I am now. It's so much better for a reader not to know that anything is autobiographical. I don't want to know anything about the writer. Quite frankly, I don't want to know that Sally Rooney's Normal People is all about her, because it's clearly all about her. I don't know if anyone's read or seen Normal People. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It's a Hulu show, but it's also a novel that was a New York Times bestseller, and it's basically about like sad millennials trying to get it together in Ireland. And it's great, but I'm pretty sure that the main character is Sally Rooney. And that's fine, but I don't want to know anything about her. I don't want to know, like, it breaks sort of the magic of the book, that there's something about like the mystery of writing that is broken when you find out that, like, I mean, for me, it's not for everybody, but for me, for sure, if I find out that the first person narrator wrote a novel about living in Brooklyn and working at, a carpenter's job, and then you find out like the main character lived in Brooklyn, you know, the writer lived in Brooklyn and worked as a carpenter. It's like, well, that took a lot of imagination. So I could have very well written a novel set in Texas about my family, and the results might have been the same. It might have been very different, but I didn't. I took these characters. I do not have a sister. You know, I'm the older brother. My brother is younger. He happens to have 5 kids, but I found that hilarious that he has 5 kids. You know, so I took like certain elements and made them my own. But autobiographically, yeah, of course. Bits and pieces for sure. But, you know, the novel set in 2022 in LA. I mean, I don't think we've lived through 2022 in LA, so I can't really say that a lot of it's autobiographical, because it's not.
I loved how you talked about you take elements from your life and you mix them together into palettes, and that's kind of what your characters come out of. That's a great like visual art image, and it's just an interesting, cool image about how characters come about. You know what I mean? What it wasn't it Janet, you know, Janet Frame, the great New Zealand writer. She had this great, I might be misquoting her terribly, but her third book, she talking about autobiography, she's a trilogy that is an autobiography, but the last one's called Envoy to Mirror City. And that was kind of her image for the creative process, that you have an envoy, like your fiction is a mirror city of your life. Like it's not the exact life, you know what I mean? It kind of goes through the process. So whatever, what you're saying there, David, just makes me think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, we have some nice questions. We're after, it's 8:12. We have about, 18 minutes left, Blake? So I did want to take a few questions that came through about process that we got earlier in the chat, David.
Sure.
And one of them's from Melissa, and she's just like, what's up next in your writing? I think you were talking. So what's up next in your writing? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's a novel called Awake, Dear Heart, Awake. And it's about unrequited love that goes horribly, horribly wrong. It's set in 1977 in New York City against the Son of Sam murders. And it's narrated by the other serial killer in 1977 that you've never heard about. So that's basically what it is. It's crazy.
Wow, what a narrator.
Yeah. I mean, you don't know that he's a serial killer. Sorry, I gave it away. Whatever.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Like, yeah. I have to find an agent. First, I have to find an agent who will, you know, read it and like it and then want to sell it. So if anyone knows of any agents out there, do let me know.
So what's the name of the title again of the novel, David?
It's Shakespeare. It comes from The Tempest. Right. Awake, dear heart, awake.
Okay, no, sure. No, I like the title a lot. Yeah.
And the every chapter is titled after a quote from a Shakespearean play, because the narrator is obsessed and teaches Shakespeare in prison, where he is friends with David Berkowitz, Son of Sam. So
I love that idea.
It's insane.
Have you written the whole thing, or is it like in process, David? Like,
it's in process.
Okay.
It's not coming out as nearly as quickly as Tell Me How This Ends will. This is like the 5th or 6th rewrite of this motherfucking book.
So yeah, Blake, should we open? Does anyone have any? We have, about 15 minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask David? Because we have some time left to definitely discuss a few more.
Well, just tongue in cheek, I think maybe Melissa said, "Yen, you've never plotted to kill your father, and your dad is on." That was funny, but
no, I've never plotted to kill my father. Crazy as that sounds. Nope. It's never happened.
Megan earlier in the chat said, just to jump a little bit around here, what was Julian's motive with the fig incident? So she asked that.
Never admit that. Yeah.
What was Julian's motive with the fig?
Yeah.
Wait, what? What?
Megan had asked, what was Julian's motive with the fig incident?
Yeah.
What do you mean? It was to kill her.
Hmm.
Right? No? That's the way I wrote it. Yeah, it was not necessarily to kill her. I guess that's a good question actually, because that's not necessarily, it wasn't to kill her. It was to make her even more dependent upon him, actually. And that's, I think, what it did. I mean, it was definitely an attempt. I mean, it was definitely like, it was a murder attempt, clearly. I mean, you don't give a child, you knowingly know who's allergic to figs. But it was, yeah, I mean, I don't think he meant, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the motivations, I mean, you kind of have to leave some of them ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever say why. I mean, the thing about this book, I mean, there was a version where I gave Julian his own section. That's interesting. I actually took that out. I
That
wrote
was
his
on the
entire,
editing floor.
that was, yeah, I just remembered that. I gave him, every character had his own section. And then I realized that I didn't want to do it that way. I didn't think he deserved a voice, quite frankly. Like you get it, you get him from everybody else. Like why? I mean, it might have made the book more interesting, I suppose, if you got his perspective and why he was the way he was. Now that I think about it, maybe I should have left it in, but it also would have made the book like inordinately long. Like it's already 400 pages. Like try like finding a publisher when you have 0 credits to your name who wants to buy a book of 600 pages. Good luck with that.
So it's sort of like you could have a director's cut version maybe one day, David, but you think you'd have a hard time
Yeah.
getting that published.
Yeah, maybe as like a director's cut, you know, for the people who participated. If you want to email out, I don't know if you want to email out those pages or not to the participants.
Gosh, I really don't.
But Megan followed up and said, "Yeah, I read it as a power move. Just wanted your take, you know, on that."
Yeah, good take, Megan. Way to go. You got it.
And Jenny kind of adds to that, and she goes, the fact that she's his favorite makes the fig incident much worse. It shows how wicked he is.
Wait, what? Say that again.
Sorry, Jenny says she's just kind of following up on this whole fig incident with Edith, and she goes, the fact that she's his favorite makes the fig incident much worse. It shows how wicked he is.
Yeah, he's pretty wicked. I mean, it was fun to write him, I have to say. I mean, it's great to write those kinds of characters. Just sort of pure evil. No, not much of any redeeming qualities. Very fun. Quite fun.
Robin said, what about Pandora? She kind of works as a soundboard.
She does. Jewish Barbie, as Edith calls her. Yeah, she works as a foil, sort of a straight man. I thought the book needed someone. There are a couple of straight men. Dietrich is a straight man. Pandora is a straight man. They kind of just tell things as they are, you know. They're like the chorus in a way. Pandora doesn't pull any punches. Dietrich doesn't pull any punches. They're outside. I made these characters, these sort of sidelined characters who actually, I mean, Pandora is very much a part of the plot, and so is Dietrich, but they remain outside of the family unit. So they're unattached in a certain way. They're like the detached voice of a chorus, like a Greek chorus, basically. And the kids the same way.
I like that. That's an interesting allegory. Yeah. No, and then there's also, I think I was just going to look at this. Yes, you know, Sam I Am's kind of following up on the previous thread we were discussing, David. Why was Edith Julian's favorite?
Probably because she was so easily manipulated.
Hmm.
Don't you think?
So it kind of just turns on itself.
Yeah. I mean, you love the one who loves you, right?
Mhm.
You don't love the one who doesn't love you, and you sense that he or she doesn't love you. So Edith, I think, genuinely loves him and loved him and sort of built this bond with him that she felt special and he made her feel special. There are plenty of sociopaths in the world who do that. I mean, Julian is a sociopath. I mean, that's how I wrote him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have never read Amazon reviews, but someone wrote in an Amazon review, which I never should have read, said something about he was just a mean man. And I'm like, no, he wasn't just a mean man. He was a sociopath and a narcissist. Those are fun characters to write, for sure. You tap into things that you never really thought you could tap into.
Is it kind of freeing to write a character like that? Because you can kind of go down certain roads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was totally fun. He was totally fun to write. And writing his section was pretty interesting too. Like, it really softened him up. But, at the end of the day, like, that wasn't the book that I wanted to give the world. It wasn't like, I thought his voice was just unnecessary. It was just an unnecessary part of the book. He comes through so loudly,
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was a very loud character. He pretty much takes up all the air in a room wherever he is. So I just thought, ugh, why bother giving him his own section?
I love that first scene. When you see Jacob with his because you kind of realize in the first section it takes a while for Jacob to see his mother. You know what I mean? A lot happens before he actually says hello to her. And the first time there's the father blocking the doorway, right? And there's this whole, interchange between Jacob and his father, and because he's just trying to get into the bedroom to say hello to his mother. So, I just thought that was just an interesting moment to see how those two characters are like tangling, literally, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a stressful moment you pick up on a lot quick as a reader.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, if we're going to go down this road, I mean, a lot of the way Julian interacts is through sarcasm, or a lot of it is actually through sarcasm. And I think, as a character, I mean, I tried to write this into his character. You never really know this because you never get into his head. But I tried to write his character as sort of confused by the world and confused by his brood and never really understanding why they react to him the way they do. And sort of, he kind of comes to it like the blows, these like verbal blows that he gives them are like, to him, they're not as dire as the other people in his life take them to be. He doesn't see them as dire, but then he has no real self-knowledge, he has no self-reflection at all. So again, just to like reiterate and beat a dead horse, the idea of giving a section to someone who has no self-reflection really didn't make any sense. Like, I think that was my reasoning for not doing it in the end. But I don't know how really unlovable he is. I mean, you only really see him. I mean, Roz, you haven't gotten to her, maybe some of you have, but through her eyes, you see who he, like, I think you get a better picture of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened,
There's actually a good question here about Roz from Melissa. And she goes, there's often a weird sexual issue between parents and kids of opposite sex. Also Roz and Jacob. So I guess
Yeah.
spinning away from Edith and Julian and going to Roz and Jacob.
Yeah, I was thinking about that scene. That was a very weird little scene to write when Jacob admits and Moses is like, "You're so insane. That never happened." Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, the Greeks, you know, whatever, what's his name, who was the Aeschylus who wrote Oedipus. Was it Aeschylus who wrote Oedipus? Sophocles who wrote Oedipus. Sophocles who wrote Oedipus Rex. I was thinking about that as I was sort of writing this. It always just amazed me, like some Greek guy wrote this bizarre play about someone who marries their mother and kills their father. Like, where did that come from and why? Like, what possessed Sophocles to write such an abomination, you know? And then I was thinking about, I mean, there's Medea, you know, the Greeks really, like, they really set us up for failure. I mean, it's amazing. And I mean, yeah, so the like the little moments of incest, I just kind of went there. You kind of just have to go there, you know? And it's interesting, my editor didn't bat an eye. We never even talked about it. Like, this is the first time it's ever even come up. It's never talked about. I had a friend who wanted to write a novel about incest, and the publisher was like, no. You know, the agent was like, no. And he should have just done it. I mean, I'm fascinated. I mean, quite frankly, I'm fascinated by incest. I think it's fascinating. Like, you love your sister so much that you want to, you know, have carnal knowledge of her. But you're like, it's so abusive at the same time, you know? It's so, I don't know. It's incestuous. I don't know. I mean, I thought it added a deeper understanding, because Jacob also, I mean, I don't know. I don't remember if this is true or not. Maybe I'm making this up, but I kind of feel like he has his issues with his mother too. It's not just his father. Jacob has issues with both parents. But at the end of the day, you know, he forgives his mother much more readily than he forgives his father. I mean, she fucked him up too. She's not like a saint. I tried to paint her. You can't have like these sort of saintly characters in books. Like, they don't, unless you're writing about saints. No one wants to read a saintly character. Like, they're boring, and, you know, they're not, I mean, it's not real life, you know? So Julian had to be the villain, and Roz had to have some kind of brushstroke, some kind of like darker brushstroke, you know? And Julian was her crucible, you know?
Robin just reminded us that John Irving wrote about incest in the Garp series. I don't know.
I love Garp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the incest in Garp. But Garp is one of my favorite books.
Have you heard that? I remember, I forget where I heard this, but John Irving will only start a book if he has the final sentence already written. So I thought that was interesting about John Irving. Well,
I had the final sentence. I actually weirdly had the final sentence of this book. I had the first sentence and the last sentence.
That's impressive. I coming from the poet standpoint, I'm like, my hat off to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I had a quick question. So, if I ever did want to write a novel, David, so you're saying, is it hard, do you think, if you're trying to like sell a novel to an agent if it's like over a certain length? Like what is, if it's over 300 pages, is it extra hard or?
No, but they really love books to be under like 350 pages.
Okay, no, I was just curious about that. Yeah.
Like most bestsellers are between like their book club length. So they're like between 300 and 350. Shorter novels do better for whatever reason. I, of course, write longer books. So, but so does John Irving.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be John Irving when I grow up, basically. He had like 5 very, 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 I mean, he was ready to give up. And then he wrote Garp, and like that changed his whole life. Garp was very long. I mean, I don't know what he wrote before, like the 500-pound marriage or something. Like his books were not received well at all. And then he wrote Garp, which came out in 78, and it changed everything. Garp is one of the best books ever written.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, what was it? Didn't Sylvia Plath, she got 17 rejections from the New Yorker before she was published. So I kind of think of that as a little persistence metaphor.
Yeah,
but
one of my favorite,
don't think about putting your head in the oven as a
no, that part. Yeah.
Forget that part.
I'll follow parts of her life, not all parts. Yeah.
Right. What, Blake?
Plath has one of my favorite quotes about persistence, and she said, "You know, I love my rejection slips. They show me I try." So I feel like you got to be racking up those rejection slips before you're going to get an acceptance. So that's words to live by as a writer, I think.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia Plath. The bell jar. It was the queer. So what was the first line of the bell jar? It was a queer summer when they executed the Rosenbergs or something.
Oh, right. No, I actually, you make me want to go look that up, David. Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
Well, this we're at time. This was great. We got great questions ahead of time. We got great questions.
Yeah, amazing.
In the chat. We're going to meet again 2 weeks from tonight to discuss the next section. And you know, if we can get your questions ahead of time, that's great. We obviously love the engagement in the chat. So we will plan to be here again 2 weeks from tonight. What else do you think, Alexandra?
Yeah, no, that it's purring along. We have and what is it? June 10th is the finale with David and his novel. So yeah, just like keep company with us. You know, we're trying to plot it out. No pun intended. So you read about 100 pages each time. But yeah, love the questions, love the engagement. I also just wanted to do a shout out to the Twig bookstore and Interrobang bookstore. They're selling David's books, UTSA libraries. All the collaborations are helping make this happen, and it's just cool. It's Texas wide, you know. So so yeah, I just think we're really looking forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks,
Stacey.
right, Blake?
Yes.
Yeah. So that.
Stacey, thanks for coming, Stacey, and thank you for that amazing article. Where did you go? There you are. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I can't thank you enough. It's been great. I love seeing all of you. It makes my life far less lonely and sad. So.
Well, you're great to listen to. It's just I'm writing down. I've quoted you several times in my notebook, David.
Oh God, thank you.
Well, and
don't quote me.
That David will be moderating our next author in the series, Kathleen Kent. We're going to read The Dime and The Burn for our, after we finish up with David. But we'll be back here again on May 27th. So if you wanted to go ahead and also order both of Kathleen's books, you can do that through Interrobang online. You can do that through the Twig bookstore in San Antonio. So thank you all for being here tonight. We look forward to seeing you.
Thank you guys for sticking it through. I appreciate it. Moses is a great section. It's very different. I mean, some of you have already read the whole novel, but Moses, yeah. And Roz, I mean, you can't give up until you've got to read Roz. I mean, Roz is like the greatest.
Yeah.
Each section builds on the last section, and also the plot ramps up. So if you were bored with one and we're struggling with one, you might find your stride with Moses. I just say keep going, come back. You need a little book culture in your life. We all do.
Well,
Thanks,
all right,
Dad,
everybody.
wherever you are.
Thank you.
Where are you, Dad?
There's your dad right there.
There's Charles.
There's Charles right
And
there.
Donna. Thank you guys for coming. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, everybody.
Bye. Is that wine? Are you having wine?